move out. Alright everybody, welcome back to Reissued. My name is Andrew. I'm a DIYer and I'm filming the process for you. So this week I am doing a little bathroom change up. I have always wanted to have one of those like East Village, Bushwicky kind of like bar bathrooms that are like super graffitied or like written all over the walls and things are like stuck up everywhere, and it just feels very like grungy and like rebellious, and it really utilizes a small space and makes it feel intimate and personal. So, as I mentioned last week, I am a renter. I do not own this apartment, so everything that I do is kind of through the lens of how can we do this and make it look as amazing as possible, but then be able to take it down later. So, peel and stick wallpaper. It's a big thing right now. I feel like everybody's doing it. I've had a little experience with peel and stick before. I used it to create a backing for a wardrobe that I had. This is my first time doing peel and stick on a wall. I'm planning to do one wall entirely and then to paint and draw and decoupage on top of it. Not sure how that's gonna work out at this point. It's gonna be kind of an experiment, but the goal is that I can get that kind of grungy bathroom, graffiti, vandalized kind of feel, but in a way that when I move out, I can just peel it off the walls and everything will be clean like nothing happened. That's the hope. I guess I won't really know if it works until I move out. Yeah, we're gonna do some experiments and see what happens.
After watching a couple tutorials about how to apply peel and stick wallpaper, I felt ready to start applying the wallpaper. Because I had a lot of obstacles to work around with the door and the shower, I decided to start in the middle of the wall rather than to one side or the other to minimize the amount of cutting I'd have to do. I ran a level along the wall to see if the paper would be plumb and drew a line to know where to start at the top. The door wasn't perfectly plumb, but I went with it anyway. I figured it would work out okay. I found 2 rolls of this white brick peel and stick wallpaper for half price at a local liquidation store. I'm a big believer that when you find exactly what you need on sale, the project is just destined to be. I peeled back a little bit of the paper and applied it along the line that I drew, leaving a little extra at the top in case the ceiling wasn't straight. One of the videos I watched recommended using an eraser from a dry erase board to smooth out the air bubbles. This worked great for me, and I would recommend this if you have one on hand. Otherwise, you can use a credit card. I kept stretching the paper to align it with the door on the left side and then smoothed out toward the right. Anytime I reached an obstacle, I lightly pulled the paper over and then cut around it with a utility knife. I didn't do the best job on some of the obstacles, but I could patch them with other paper as necessary. This print was super forgiving, and plus I could always paint over it or glue over it or cover it up some other way. Once I reached the bottom, I estimated a little pass where the trim would meet and cut it off. I'll cut off the excess later. I did remove the towel bar since I wouldn't be able to cut around it. For the second strip, I held it up to see where the pattern lined up and then got ready to stick it. In all the videos I watched, one question was left unanswered. Do I overlap the paper or not? Some sources said not to overlap and to butt up the paper against the first strip, but the source that I found said to overlap just a little bit in case the paper shrunk. I preferred this since I didn't want any chance of paint or glue leaking through onto the wall, so I ended up overlapping it just a little bit. It was hard enough to stretch the paper to keep the overlap, so I can't imagine trying to butt the edges together and make it perfect all the way down. Fast forward and repeat. Once I had applied all the pieces, I ran my blade along the baseboard and the ceiling to remove the excess. At this point, I needed to experiment to see which mediums could work on the wallpaper without bleeding through to the wall. I tried Sharpie, acrylic paint, watered down acrylics, and some matte Mod Podge that I wanted to use to decoupage paper onto the wall. The watered down acrylics seemed to weaken the paper, but after leaving them to dry, none of the mediums bled through to the back, so good to go. Now for the fun part. I Googled around for images that inspired me or felt special or personal, or that just gave me that irreverent, anachronistic retro vibe that I was after. I also looked for a combination of black and white and color images that had similar colors. As much as I would like to be one of those people that can spontaneously design and just stick things to the wall, I definitely did some planning for the layout, and I would recommend that anyone would do this as well. It's just helpful to know kind of where things will go and how big to make them. I measured my space and drew up a wall to scale in Keynote. Then I played around with the images on the wall, changing the size and placement until they felt right. I went to the site remove.bg, quickly removed the backgrounds on some of the images to get a better sense of how they would look on the wall. Once I had my design sketch, I started with the large Alice at the bottom since she was the only one I would be drawing by hand. I wanted to put my projector to use, although I had to position it pretty oddly to get the image where I wanted. It wasn't ideal, but it worked out okay. Once the placement looked right, I quickly scribbled over the lines, paying special attention to the contrast between the light areas and the dark areas. On to printing. I headed over to rasterbator.com to blow up the images. I've used this site for years and it's just such a great resource. You upload your image, you select the size that you want, select any effects that you want to add, and then download the file. This scales the images so they can be printed on a standard printer over multiple pages. I wasn't super exact with the proportions when I blew up the images, but I had a rough idea of about how big each one should be based on the Keynote sketch that I drew up. I arranged the pages to create the larger image and then cut down all the edges. I repeated this process for all the images, which took forever. Consulting my sketch, I started applying the images to the wall with Mod Podge. It took me a minute to figure out the best mode of application, but I think I figured it out. First, I would test to see where the image should be placed. Next, I would paint on the glue right in the center of the image without worrying about the edges. Then I would stick it in place. If you work quickly, you can have enough time to readjust if necessary. After that, go ahead and apply all the surrounding pieces for that image. Then you can lift up the edges and push the glue underneath. The glue that has had a little bit of time to dry in the center keeps them from moving around while you do this. Then you can paint over the top to press the edges down and blend in any excess glue, or you can tear the edges to give an unfinished look. Finally, I applied a thin coat of glue to the center of the image to give a consistent finish over the whole image. If you're having trouble knowing where to place the images, you can create small loops of painter's tape to hold them in place so you can get a look from multiple angles. You can also experiment with peeling the images after they've had a chance to dry to give that kind of like peeling wallpaper look. Once all of the images were glued, I wanted to add more color to break up the background and take away a little of the cool whiteness of the paper. Since acrylics would be too opaque and watered down acrylics were questionable based on my test, I opted to create a wash with a little bit of paint mixed into some Mod Podge. This allowed me to get sheer coverage without being super wet. I focused some browns and yellows toward the corners of the wall to give a vignette effect, and also darkened specific bricks by stamping the mixture on with my brush. Finally, I went in with Sharpie and thicker acrylic paint, writing quotes and captions and defacing and outlining images. I also used a little silver spray paint from last week's project, although I didn't film it since it was a lot of pressure to get it right in one swipe. I made sure to turn on the fan and leave the room for a few minutes after spraying to avoid the fumes. And it's done, kinda. I think this is one of those projects that will continue to grow as I add more stuff over time. I could just keep adding things arbitrarily for now to fill up the wall, but this is the kind of thing that should be personal and meaningful, so I want to give it time for myself and other people to write on the wall and sort of fill it out entirely. So for now, here it is.